editing. So, I love talking about editing mainly because people think I'm good at it, and I'm very average. Compared to Christian, I'm a very bad editor, but compared to most people, I'm a pretty good editor. So, take that for what it is. Do I need editing? You as a podcaster, do you need editing? Now, a big theme to this podcast has been P, either it's personal or professional. If it's personal, maybe. If it's professional, most definitely. If you're doing a professional podcast for your business, you're going to want to pay for editing. Either do it yourself or pay a staff member to do it or pay someone like myself or Christian to do it. But do I need editing? I think it depends on what kind of podcast you have. So, for example, if you have a solo show, it's about 30 minutes long, and it's just kind of you, just long-winded, there's not much to edit there, right? If you make mistakes while recording, you can just cut those out and make it sound a little more fluid. But that's just a light editing you can just learn and do by yourself on the free softwares like we mentioned in our previous episode. If you can also throw some effects racks on, some minor edits, adding an intro and an outro. Whether you're a business or professional, you shouldn't, business or personal podcast, you really don't need to pay for that. That's something you can do very easily on your own. We're going to do some screen recordings later on in this episode showing you exactly how to do all of that. But if you have an interview and you have a guest and it's recorded on a single track, then realistically, there's not much that can be done. It's not much compared to a solo show because, like, for example, say Christian and I were not in this soundproof studio and we were in my apartment in Hoboken and I live next to a fire station and a fire truck goes by. I can't just single out the fire truck and get rid of it because it's recorded on one track. Whereas, like, if I'm at home in Christian's studio and recording on separate tracks, you could. As long as I'm not talking, I could isolate out that fire engine sound and cut it out. So the same thing, you could put on a few effects racks, put in an intro and an outro, some light edits with music. But if an interview is recorded on a single track, there's not really much you can do. Christian, am I right or wrong on that?
Oh, 100% right. Especially if you're doing an interview, two people talking at the same time, if you're talking over each other, there's no way to separate the voices. So if you are going to do an interview, I highly recommend trying to use two microphones. Yeah. Even if they aren't top shelf, but having two microphones can make all the difference in times where things are talking, two people are talking at the same time, and that happens.
Yeah. So if you have multiple guests recorded on multi-track, you can do multi-track in pretty much any editing software nowadays. And sometimes if you're on Zoom, you can do separate audio recordings. I believe some of the online softwares we talked about a few episodes back, they also had like multi-track recording, which is important. So that makes this better for editing. Because the reason is, like I said earlier, there's much more you can actually edit. There's much more fluidity you can do. You can get rid of where guests talk over each other. You can fix levels in case someone like me who's bombastic and loud talking with Christian who's a little more reserved and quiet. You can pod me down or bump him up, and that's much easier to do when you record on multi-track.
And that's essentially, I mean, we're probably going to get into this a little bit more later, but that's what mixing is. You need things to mix together. Let's turn this up. Let's turn this down. That is what multi-track is, when you have different things to adjust versus mastering, which may be just a singular audio file.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, do I need editing? Well, it depends how it's recorded. Really, it depends how it's
depends
recorded.
Depends on the equipment you have, depends on how it's recorded, all of the things.
Yeah. And, multi-track, it's a lot easier to add in intros, ad breaks, right? Like, especially if, like, you're on the actual podcast. Yeah, here we go, Christian. Split screen. If you're, like, say you want to do an ad break in 15 minutes in, and, like, while you're recording, you could throw to the ad. When we're recording, you just hit M to mark the audio. We're going to go over that in a little bit in a screen recording. So it's when it pulls on multi-track, you know where to cut, move, and put everything. But if it's a narrative podcast, you most definitely need professional and top-notch editing to make sure the music is mixed and mastered correctly. The sound effects are all there. So if you're doing a narrative podcast, whether it's for personal reasons or a professional reason, you're definitely going to need editing. Either learn it yourself or just pay the big bucks and have someone do that for you, because that's going to take a big project. But overall, editing depends on the production and scale of your podcast. Do not overthink editing or lack of editing. Or don't overthink your editing, or don't think that lacks of editing make your podcast bad. Very tongue-tied, but you know what I mean.